The second episode of Season 4 of Anger Management continues the chaotic story of Charlie Goodson, a former professional baseball player who has turned his own struggles with anger and emotional instability into a career as a therapist. Charlie's greatest contradiction has always been that he is much better at identifying problems in other people's lives than he is at controlling his own behavior. After the upheaval surrounding his arrest and the disruption to his therapy practice, Charlie finds himself once again dealing with the consequences of his unconventional lifestyle. The episode combines Charlie's professional responsibilities, his complicated relationships with his patients, and his tendency to create unnecessary trouble whenever his personal and professional lives collide. Rather than presenting therapy as a serious and orderly process, the episode turns Charlie's practice into a chaotic environment where everyone seems to have an opinion about everyone else's problems. At the beginning of the episode, Charlie is attempting to restore some sense of normality after the events that have recently disrupted his life. His arrest and the intervention that followed have forced him to think about his behavior. But Charlie is not the kind of person who suddenly becomes responsible simply because someone tells him that he needs to change. He understands the criticism directed at him, but he also believes that the people around him sometimes exaggerate his mistakes. Charlie's natural reaction to uncomfortable situations is to make jokes, change the subject, or turn the criticism back on the person delivering it. This defensive personality remains one of the biggest obstacles in his life. His therapy practice is particularly complicated because the people he treats have become deeply familiar with his personality. They know that Charlie can be arrogant, sarcastic, irresponsible, and occasionally hypocritical. At the same time, they also know that he is genuinely interested in helping them. Charlie's unconventional approach has allowed the group to make progress in ways that a more traditional therapist might not have achieved. He does not pretend to have a perfect life, and that makes some of his patients feel comfortable admitting their own failures. The problem is that Charlie's recent problems have caused the group to question whether he is still capable of being their therapist. His patients have already considered replacing him, and their uncertainty continues to create tension. They may complain about Charlie constantly, but the idea of actually losing him is much more uncomfortable than they expected. Their relationship has become more than a professional arrangement. They have developed friendships, rivalries, and a strange sense of community through their therapy sessions. Charlie notices this uncertainty and tries to reassure the group that everything is under control. This is typical Charlie behavior. Rather than admitting that his personal problems have affected his professional responsibilities, he attempts to convince everyone that he has learned from his mistakes. His confidence makes the situation funny because the audience can clearly see that Charlie has not completely changed. He is still the same man who has spent years making impulsive decisions and then finding clever explanations for them afterward. One of the episode's central ideas is the difference between being a therapist and actually being emotionally healthy. Charlie can recognize destructive behavior when he sees it in his patients, but that does not mean he automatically follows his own advice. He knows exactly how people rationalize their mistakes because he has done it himself countless times. When a patient describes avoiding responsibility, Charlie can immediately identify the pattern. Yet when someone points out that Charlie is doing exactly the same thing, he becomes defensive. This contradiction creates several humorous exchanges between Charlie and the members of his group. Each patient has a different interpretation of Charlie's behavior, and they are not afraid to tell him what they think. Charlie tries to maintain his authority as the therapist, but his patients increasingly treat him like another member of the group. They interrupt him, challenge his opinions, and point out inconsistencies in his arguments. Instead of becoming angry, Charlie often responds with sarcasm, which only encourages them to continue. The temporary therapist situation also remains important. The group has experienced what it is like to consider someone else taking Charlie's place, and that experience has changed the way they see him. Even though Charlie can be frustrating, they realize that he understands their personalities in a way that a stranger cannot. A new therapist would need to spend months learning the history of the group, while Charlie already knows everyone's emotional triggers, relationship problems, and personal weaknesses. Charlie uses this fact to his advantage. He reminds his patients that he has been with them through some of their most embarrassing moments, and that he understands where their problems come from. However, His argument becomes slightly hypocritical because his own recent behavior has shown that he also needs someone to challenge him. The patients recognize this contradiction and are quick to point it out. Meanwhile, Charlie's personal life continues to overlap with his professional responsibilities. His relationships with women remain complicated, and his history of casual relationships creates opportunities for misunderstandings. Charlie often believes that he can separate romance from emotion, but his experiences repeatedly prove otherwise. He enjoys the freedom of being single, yet he also wants the emotional security that comes with having someone who genuinely cares about him. This conflict becomes another source of tension. Charlie wants to be independent, but he does not like feeling alone. He often tries to maintain multiple relationships because he believes that doing so gives him control. In reality, it frequently creates confusion and jealousy. The people around him recognize this pattern even when Charlie refuses to acknowledge it. His relationship with Jennifer remains especially important because she knows Charlie better than almost anyone. Even though their marriage ended, they remain connected through their children. Jennifer has little patience for Charlie's excuses and can usually tell when he is avoiding responsibility. Their conversations often become competitive because neither wants to admit that the other person has made a valid point. Jennifer also understands that Charlie's behavior affects more than himself. His children see his choices, and his example matters even when Charlie is not thinking about it. He wants to be viewed as a good father, but being a good parent requires consistency, something Charlie sometimes struggles to provide. His children have learned to expect his unpredictable personality, but that does not mean his behavior has no consequences. Charlie tries to balance these different responsibilities throughout the episode. He wants to be a successful therapist, a good father, a loyal friend, and an independent man. The problem is that his choices frequently put these goals into conflict. When he prioritizes pleasure, his professional life suffers. When he focuses on work, his personal relationships become complicated. When he attempts to satisfy everyone, he usually creates an even bigger mess. The therapy group becomes an important source of perspective because Charlie cannot easily escape criticism from people who know him well. They have heard his theories about anger, relationships, and self-control for years, so they can recognize when he is failing to follow his own principles. Their comments are often brutally honest, but there is also genuine affection behind them. One patient may approach Charlie with frustration, another with skepticism, and another with concern. Together, they create an environment in which Charlie is forced to listen. He may joke throughout the conversation, but he cannot completely dismiss what they say. Their observations reveal that his recent problems are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger pattern in which Charlie repeatedly assumes that he can control situations that are actually becoming increasingly difficult to manage. The episode also continues the show's recurring theme of emotional hypocrisy. Nearly everyone in Charlie's world gives advice that they do not consistently follow. The patients criticize Charlie, but they also have serious problems of their own. Charlie points this out whenever he feels cornered, arguing that his patients are hardly qualified to judge him. This creates a humorous cycle in which everyone exposes everyone else's weaknesses. Despite the comedy, there is an important emotional point beneath these arguments. People do not have to be perfect to help each other. Charlie's patients may be deeply flawed, but their ability to recognize his mistakes does not disappear simply because they have problems of their own. In fact, their shared imperfections are part of what makes the group work. Charlie gradually begins to understand this. He does not suddenly become a completely different person, but he becomes more willing to accept that other people may see things about him that he cannot see himself. His instinct is still to defend his behavior, but the constant pressure from his patients and friends makes it harder for him to ignore reality. Another important element is Charlie's relationship with therapy itself. He often treats therapy as something that can be reduced to common sense, but the episode demonstrates that emotional problems are rarely that simple. Charlie can give a clever explanation for someone's behavior, but changing that behavior requires patience and effort. He knows this professionally, yet he sometimes forgets it personally. His patients provide a living demonstration of that principle. They have attended therapy for a long time, but they continue making mistakes. Progress does not mean that they stop having problems. Instead, it means that they become slightly better at recognizing those problems and dealing with them. Charlie is forced to apply the same standard to himself. As the episode continues, the possibility of losing his patience becomes increasingly important to Charlie. He has spent years pretending that he does not need anyone emotionally, but his reaction shows otherwise. The therapy group has become part of his identity. Helping these people gives him a sense of purpose that he does not always get from his personal relationships. Charlie therefore has more at stake than simply keeping his job. If the group decides to leave him, he will lose people who have become important to him. This realization makes him more willing to listen, even if he continues pretending that he is completely in control. The temporary therapist's role also serves as a contrast to Charlie's style. A more conventional therapist might approach the group with greater professionalism and emotional distance. Charlie, however, prefers direct confrontation, humor, and personal experience. His methods may sometimes be inappropriate, but they create a unique environment where patients feel that they can speak openly. The group eventually recognizes that the temporary arrangement cannot completely replace Charlie. They may want him to behave more responsibly, but they still value what he provides. This creates a compromise. Charlie must acknowledge that he has responsibilities toward them, while the patients must accept that he is never going to become a completely conventional therapist. This compromise is representative of the entire series. Charlie's life rarely reaches a perfect resolution. Instead, people learn to manage one another's imperfections. His relationships survive because the people around him understand that he is flawed but not incapable of caring. The episode also gives Charlie another opportunity to demonstrate his unusual therapeutic instincts. When one of his patients struggles with a personal problem, Charlie immediately recognizes the emotional pattern behind it. He explains that anger is often a secondary emotion caused by fear, embarrassment, rejection, or insecurity. The patient initially resists the idea, but Charlie's explanation eventually forces them to reconsider their behavior. Ironically, the same explanation could apply to Charlie. His sarcasm and arrogance often protect him from admitting that he is afraid of losing control or being rejected. He uses humor to create emotional distance. If he can turn something serious into a joke, he does not have to admit that it hurts him. This becomes especially obvious when Charlie's relationships are threatened. He tends to act as though he does not care, but his actions reveal that he cares deeply. His greatest fear is not necessarily being alone. It is being emotionally dependent on someone and then being hurt. By pretending that relationships are casual, Charlie believes he can protect himself. The episode does not completely resolve this problem, but it gives viewers another glimpse into why Charlie behaves the way he does. His anger, sarcasm, and impulsive behavior are not random. They are defense mechanisms that developed over years of disappointment and emotional instability. The comedy works because Charlie refuses to acknowledge these explanations too easily. If someone tells him that he is afraid of emotional intimacy, he might immediately respond with a joke or an insult. His resistance keeps the conversations entertaining while also revealing how accurate the criticism may be. By the latter part of the episode, Charlie's professional and personal problems begin converging. He realizes that the same habits causing trouble in his personal life are affecting his work. Avoiding responsibility, refusing to listen, and assuming he can control everyone around him are not sustainable strategies. The people closest to him make this clear. His friends, family members, and patients all have different reasons for challenging him, but their message is essentially the same. Charlie cannot continue expecting other people to accommodate every one of his bad decisions. Charlie finally begins accepting a limited amount of responsibility. He does not make a dramatic confession or completely change his personality. Instead, he acknowledges that some of his recent behavior has gone too far and that he needs to make better choices. This modest realization is appropriate for Charlie's character. The show does not portray personal growth as a single dramatic transformation. Charlie has spent years developing his habits, so changing them will take time. The important thing is that he becomes slightly more aware of the consequences. The therapy group also leaves the episode with a clearer understanding of their own relationship with Charlie. They may still complain about him, but they know that he is valuable to them. Their willingness to challenge him actually demonstrates how much they care. They are not simply clients paying for professional advice. They have become a dysfunctional community. Charlie, in turn, realizes that being their therapist does not mean he has to pretend to be perfect. His credibility comes partly from his willingness to admit that he has problems too. The challenge is making sure that his own problems do not prevent him from helping others. The second episode of Season 4 therefore continues the central contradiction that defines anger management. Charlie is an expert at explaining emotional problems, but an amateur at managing his own life. He understands why people behave irrationally, but he repeatedly behaves irrationally himself. He knows that communication is important, yet he frequently avoids difficult conversations. He teaches people to control anger while constantly finding new reasons to become frustrated. That contradiction is what makes Charlie such an effective sitcom character. He is not a traditional therapist who has mastered emotional control. He is a deeply flawed man who happens to understand human psychology remarkably well. His patients do not necessarily follow him because he is perfect. They follow him because he understands what it feels like to fail. The episode ends with Charlie remaining firmly in his familiar position, surrounded by people who know his weaknesses. Dependent on relationships he pretends not to need, and still trying to convince everyone that he has everything under control. The difference is that he is beginning to understand that control is not the same thing as responsibility. Ultimately, the episode is about the uncomfortable process of accepting help. Charlie spends much of his life believing that because he is the therapist, he should be the one giving advice. But the events surrounding his arrest, his personal relationships, and his therapy group demonstrate that even therapists need people who can challenge them. His patients may not have all the answers, but they can still hold up a mirror and show Charlie what his behavior looks like from the outside. The humor comes from the fact that Charlie hates looking into that mirror. He would rather make a joke, flirt with someone, or change the subject than admit that he is vulnerable. Yet the people around him refuse to let him escape completely. Their persistence gradually forces him to confront the possibility that his biggest problem is not anger itself, but his refusal to admit when he is wrong. In the end, Charlie and the Return of the Temporary Therapist continues the fourth season by showing that Charlie's life is still